All right, we are now live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream on MintPress. I am Mnar Adley. I'm the founder and director of MintPress News and Behind the Headlines. Today, I'm joined by our senior staff writer and lead investigative journalist, Alan MacLeod. And also, we are joined by activist rapper, host of the Watchdog podcast, and our Palestine editor, Lowkey. But before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that our YouTube channel recently got completely demonetized. So we would greatly appreciate your support by becoming a member of our Patreon, which we will link below in the comments. Much of the work that we are doing right now is supported by viewers like yourself. So we'd appreciate any support that you can provide to us. It's obviously been a very, very difficult week watching in real time Israel pummel Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison with Western-provided bombs targeting civilians, schools, hospitals, residential neighborhoods, electric grids, and water treatment facilities. Some 300 children have died and over 200,000 people have been displaced and made homeless. Thousands more have been injured. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I've seen as many videos of dead children in my years of reporting here at MintPress. So a little bit of background. After Hamas's surprise attack and Palestinians breaking through the Gaza border fence, we've heard Israeli politicians refer to Palestinians as human animals that should be nuked and will be given hell. We've heard similar sentiments from US politicians like Nikki Haley and Lindsey Graham, who have made genocidal calls on Israel to finish them off, level them. Now, so far, the U.S. has sent 6 warships headed by the U.S. Navy's largest and most advanced aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean Sea this week, raising questions about whether the U.S. will get involved in this war. Israel has targeted Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon and has bombed Syria, all in the same week it was bombing Gaza. This crisis has also ignited a war of narratives, worthy and unworthy victims, and has underlined the Western media's inability to hold Israel accountable for blatant war crimes. But one thing is certain, however, many unverified claims are making the rounds that are being spread by Western media and Israeli government-funded groups, including the claim that Hamas has beheaded 40 babies. So there's a lot to unpack with what is happening in Gaza and deconstructing mainstream media narratives and propaganda. But I would like to start with this story of the unverified claim of the beheaded babies, because it's the perfect example of how unverified claims can circulate and become news, especially when we have the president himself going on live TV, broadcasted to millions of people in this country, saying and claiming that he saw pictures of beheaded babies himself. Well, it turns out the White House has come out in the last 24 hours and clarified that the president actually didn't see any pictures of beheaded babies, and the Israeli military could not confirm these claims. There are Israeli journalists themselves that have been touring with the Israeli military in the south, who have been tweeting that they also have not seen or heard of anything about beheaded babies. Clearly, the first casualty of war is truth. And so this is where I'd like us to begin, and we'll get into the history of what led up to October 7th when Palestinians broke through the Gaza border fence and the attack happened by Hamas. But first, let's talk about this story. Lowkey, if you can tell us more about it and how its footing got in within outlets like CNN, who headlined with it yesterday as if it was fact, and why it's most likely fake news.
Well, as has been reported by the Grey Zone in a very important piece, seemingly the original source for the claim was an Israeli soldier and leader of a settler group that had previously, he'd called for genocidal violence against Palestinians. His name is David Ben Zion. Now, he had given a report to I-24 News claiming that he had seen these dead children. Now, I-24 is important to understand what it is as an institution. It is a company owned by Patrick Drahi, a billionaire who seemingly has close links with Israeli intelligence and also owns several telecommunications companies, not only in France, but even is the top shareholder in British Telecom in this country. But in order for I-24 to procure a particular operating license in Israel, it became closer and closer to the Netanyahu family, in fact, and was seen previously in a Haaretz investigation to be literally cancelling guests at the behest of Benjamin Netanyahu's son. We also know that I-24 had previously been receiving directives directly from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. It is throughout the company, staffed by former Israeli military and intelligence and people that have gone from working for I-24 to working as social media editors at the Israeli military and then going back into I-24. So what we're talking about, and really it's a wider societal observation, that the integration of the Israeli military in so many different aspects of this settler society is really quite significant and cannot be underestimated. Now, the interesting thing is from there, the idea took off, and it was then covered by the independent newspaper in England, and the journalist who said she'd heard of it later backtracked on the claim again. So bit by bit, the story kept being backtracked on. And as you mentioned, Joe Biden, the senile US president, who is very much a placeman for those in power behind him, who is sort of pushed out to make these awkward pronouncements that the US security services are constantly trying to catch up with and make up for, really. And that's why the sort of role of White House spokespeople and State Department spokespeople have become so much more important, because the US president is even worse than Trump when it comes to actually articulating ideas in a coherent way. And so Joe Biden then ends up making this speech yesterday in which he says that he saw evidence, he saw pictures of terrorists beheading children. So he went further from saying that he'd seen that. He said he saw pictures of terrorists doing it. So then that would beg the question, who was taking the picture of the terrorists doing it? And then interestingly, after the speech, a White House spokesperson then says, actually, the president did not see that. He was speaking on information he had been given by the Israeli Prime Minister's office. And now you've had the Israelis climb down on the claim, but then simultaneous to that, the Jerusalem Post, which is, of course, led by somebody who is a reserve in the Israeli military and has a long history of reproducing Israeli government talking points, has come out and said that they have conclusive evidence. And so really, you see off the back of that particular claim, in a way, it's often the way things work. If you remember with the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, you had several bits of mythology established directly after her killing to imply, well, maybe it could be this or maybe it could be that, when actually what we then found was them later having to, if it's okay, if we can mute the other two speakers, if it's okay, if we can just mute, because some of the clicking is coming through. And basically the point is that what we've seen is bit by bit the story come apart in very, very interesting ways. So the lesson in this is, now we've seen the CNN also come out with it, and then CNN again climb down from it. So there's so many ways in which it is clearly not a solid story with a solid foundation. And interestingly enough, the Israeli government, the military secretary, has met with social media influencers and asked them to push particular lines on this war. And for example, you've even seen on YouTube adverts being inserted and directly paid for by the Israeli government. So they carry the Israeli government's logo, these adverts inserted on videos which are aimed at children and saying in the adverts that Hamas, in quotations, ISIS, in the video, killed 40 children. So we're seeing really this idea being pushed as much as possible. But recently, as in last night, we also saw...
Can I play that video really quick? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please do.
I think it would be really good to see that. And you actually tweeted it out on your Twitter page. And so here's the video. I think that was it, right?
Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah, this is the one.
Still, did it play the whole way through?
No, there it is.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
It's quite sinister.
Really sinister. And I put it in the link along with another video in the script for today's show. And the other video actually shows the recent interview that was carried out a few hours ago with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Now, bear in mind that Naftali Bennett is somebody that says that he has killed a lot of Arabs, and that is nothing to be ashamed of in the past. This is somebody who I believe was in the Israeli military during a war with Lebanon. And if we can just show this video, it should be the second to, yeah, it should be the last link.
1 second.
And what about those Palestinians in hospital who are on life support, and babies and incubators whose life support and incubator will have to be turned off because the Israelis have cut the power to Gaza?
Are you seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you? Have you not seen what happened? We're fighting Nazis. We don't target them. Now, the world can come and bring them anything they want. If you want to bring them electricity, I'm not going to feed electricity or water to my enemies. If anyone else wants, that's fine. We're not responsible for them.
This is the point.
But you
this
keep
is the
on.
point.
I want to tell you. No, listen. You listen to me right now. I've heard you enough.
No, I understand. We're trying to have a conversation here. Listen, this is my program. This is my show. And I am asking the questions. You're raising your voice, and I've asked you, and we've already stopped, please, and let me finish. We've already distinguished between Hamas.
I want to tell you, shame on you.
You're trying to speak over me.
We are not. Shame on you.
It's nothing about shame. We're trying to have a conversation about a very serious situation here, and you are refusing to address it.
Jump over immediately, and again, you
absolutely not. You are incorrect.
They are responsible, because I can tell you that when the UK,
absolutely
when Great Britain was fighting the Nazis during World War II, no one asked what's going on in Dresden. It was the Nazis targeting London, and you targeted Dresden. So
listen,
shame on you if you go on with that false narrative.
We're not talking about that, and in hindsight, many people have listened. And in hindsight, many people have readdressed that kind of carpet bombing.
Oh, I see. Now you're Mr. Clean. Shame on you.
Absolutely not. And I'm not. Listen, Mr. Bennett, I am not in the military. I am a journalist asking you questions. Are you going to let me ask you a question, or you continue shouting at me? We've already distinguished between Hamas and the Palestinians. I'm asking you very directly.
What do you want to ask?
Is going to be done to make sure that those innocent people don't get killed, as innocent Jewish people were killed on Saturday?
Wow. I mean, the arrogance that Bennett portrays is absolutely disgusting. I mean, this is another example of, worthy and unworthy victims that we're seeing within the media landscape.
Absolutely. And this is a perfect example of the rancid scumbag killer that is Naftali Bennett, essentially using the propaganda that has been built up over decades, not just about Palestinians, but about Muslims, to basically provide a foundation for his cruelty on an industrial scale.
Absolutely. And we've seen, unfortunately, similar kind of talking points by US politicians who are directly receiving funding from AIPAC and other lobby groups like Nikki Haley. I'm trying to find the link just because it's so outrageous. But Alan, before we go into that, I'm going to ask Alan what you can make of the headlines that we're seeing within mainstream corporate media in the way that they're portraying Palestinians as unworthy victims and Israelis as worthy victims.
Yeah, most definitely. Unfortunately, when it comes to Palestine, a lot of the time these stories are too bad to be true. And we're seeing so much ludicrous fake news coming out of this place right now that it really takes people, really means that you've got to spend hours and hours trying to siphon through what is real and what is fake. And most people just don't have time for that. As you said, Israelis are generally portrayed as worthy victims. Palestinians, however, are not worthy of our time. There have been studies after studies showing that every time Israel, quote unquote, mows the lawn, as they call it, the backlash is intense, but the media coverage always centers around Israeli dead and generally ignores or downplays Palestinian dead. Perhaps the best example of this in the last couple of days was that infamous BBC tweet that they put up saying that more than 700 Israelis have been killed. Meanwhile, around 500 Palestinians have died. Now, what they're doing there is using the passive voice and using a very important choice of words there. You know, Israelis are killed, meanwhile, Palestinians die. That suggests to the reader that, you know, if you're not paying attention, you might think, well, these people just, you know, had a stroke or had a heart attack or whatever, instead of the fact that they were actually bombed, they were killed, they were shot, whatever. And this happens every single time there is violence in the Middle East. That tweet, by the way, also very interestingly casts Israel as retaliating or responding to the violence, and Palestine, and specifically Hamas, as the initiators of the violence. But of course, the violence didn't start on October 7th. We have, you know, more than 75 years of a continuing Israeli violence against Gaza, against Palestine to go through. And that is really the context that is just not that is just always missing from mainstream media reports. Another of the most blatant fake news stories that's been out there is the case of Shani Luke. And hopefully I'm not butchering her name too much. But she attended the Supernova Festival, which was in southern Israel, that was ambushed by Hamas over the weekend. It was widely reported that she was murdered by Hamas. You can see headlines from outlets around the world, from Yahoo News, TMZ, Business Insider, the Daily Mail, etc. And then they were all full of these lurid stories that she was stripped and her naked body was paraded through the streets of Gaza for everybody to gawk at. Almost like it was a trophy. This incited huge global anger. You know, this sort of this story led headlines and led news bulletins all around the world, and the calls for an overwhelming military response grew on the back of this. There's really only one problem with that, though. Luke was later confirmed to be alive and had actually been taken to hospital. And it turns out that the videos of her, quote unquote, being paraded through the streets on the back of a truck, it seems more likely now that those people were actually driving her to hospital, so they might have actually been saving her life rather than parading her about. Yet few of the outlets that irresponsibly publish this without verifying any of these claims, which are wildly incendiary, have published apologies or even retractions. But it doesn't really matter if they do, because as they always say, a lie gets around the world before the truth has put its pants on. And so ultimately, viewers, readers are left with the idea that Palestine is this barbarous state full of terrorists who just want to harm Israelis all the time, and Israel is a democracy responding to threats in a bad neighborhood. And that ultimately is going to drive so much of Western public opinion when Western governments start announcing new benefits packages, new aid, perhaps even military assistance to Israel in what could be a very bloody coming fight.
And just to add on to some of the mainstream media bias in its coverage towards when it's covering Israel and Palestine, it seems as though, like Lowkey had said at the very beginning, it's as if everyone has given the same script. Corporate media anchors and journalists and pundits and analysts and reporters and bureau chiefs alike repeat the same line that Israel has the right to defend itself as it bombs Gaza's 2 million Palestinian population, targeting civilians while it's violating international law. And then every time Palestinians are interviewed, they are always asked immediately if they denounce violence and Hamas, and run with unverified stories handed to them a lot of times by the Israeli government. And I want to use the example of the New York Times and how the New York Times is not neutral or in any way close to being objective on this crisis. Not only has the newspaper constantly supported Israel's expansionist policy, it itself has directly participated in the dispossession of Palestinians from their home. I've actually written about this myself, but the New York Times bureau, Jerusalem bureau, is actually built on a Palestinian house, which belongs to a noted Palestinian writer named Ghada Karmi, which Lowkey has interviewed on our show before. And she's a survivor of the Nakba. She was basically ethnically cleansed from her home to make room for this New York Times bureau. The Times also often cooperates directly with the Israeli military. It publishes unverified claims handed to them by the Israeli military. And in a lot of cases, like in 2014, which is a good example, it received and obeyed an Israeli gag order to suppress the news that Israel had arrested a Palestinian journalist. From 2008 to 2012, the New York Times Israel bureau chief, Ethan Bronner, was also exposed to having his 20-year-old son enlist in the Israeli army while he was actively covering the region for the newspaper. So, and this wasn't even made public by the New York Times. The so-called paper of record never made this public to its readers. And it was actually exposed in an investigation by Electronic Intifada. And it really raised questions, serious questions about the New York Times bias and its conflict of interest in covering the conflict. And most recently, just in the last, I believe the last year or two, the New York Times also fired Gaza photographer Hussam Salem from his following an intervention, from an Israel lobby group called Honest Reporting, which we have covered on our website. And Ethan Bronner, the Jerusalem bureau for the New York Times, is just one example. Other people that work for the New York Times that cover Israel and Palestine include Isabel Kirshner and David Brooks, who've all written about the crisis. And all three of these people have had relatives serving and fighting within the Israeli military. And so that's just one example of one media outlet in the United States that is working directly with the Israeli government, and we cannot rely on to provide even a neutral perspective. So I want to go back a little bit further, because I think a lot of people are trying to put all of this into perspective and understand, how did we get here? What actually led up to October 7th, when Hamas came in on paragliders and targeted an Israeli settlement at the music festival? And how did Palestinians in Gaza break through the border fence? What actually led up to October 7th? Karim, can you tell us? And by the way, can I ask you a quick question? I'm so sorry. Somebody put in the comments that your song, Terrorist, was removed. Is that true?
As far as I know, it hasn't been removed, but it is. It has an age restriction on it. But I can check now and see if it has been removed. Because to be honest, the way things are going, it wouldn't surprise me. Just before we, yeah, it seems to have been removed. Wow.
Okay. Well, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, this song, Terrorist, is one of the most important songs that we all listen to in our 20s and early 30s. That hopefully that won't expose our age here, but that really influenced our understanding of the Israel and Palestine crisis. And it really was empowering to a lot of people in the movement to continue to speak up for Palestine. And I don't know, do you want to talk about this first? Because I'm sure this is a shock to you right now, as you just found out on like during a live stream.
Wow. Well, I mean, I knew it was age restricted. It had 5.5 million views and has now seemingly been taken off of YouTube. Wow. What a way to find out. But I guess, you know, the more important issue is Gaza and what you asked about and what you mentioned. Essentially, we are talking about a place where people have every aspect of their life dictated to them in a material way. So what Israel attempted to create with Gaza was a frictionless occupation, meaning that there was as little physical interaction between people in Gaza and Israelis. So Israelis and Palestinians were very far away from each other. The only way Israelis would interact with Palestinians in Gaza was through machinery, like drones, like sniper rifles, for example. You know, we have to remember that the Palestinians have the right of return under UN Resolution 194. And unfortunately, what happened was in 2018, Palestinians, the vast majority of the Palestinian population in Gaza are refugees. They attempted to fulfill their right to return. Now, when they did that, the Israeli military had a policy of shooting them. These people were walking towards the fence unarmed, and they were being shot in their knees. And that's why they said that Gaza is a city of amputees, because you had thousands of Palestinians that have had their knees shot off by Israeli military sniper rifles and sniper rifle components that were sold to them by the British. And obviously now we have the British Navy going to join on the edge of Palestine. We have the US aircraft carrier there as well. I'm so sorry. If it's okay, if we could just mute. Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem. So the aircraft carrier literally going to the edge of Palestine, and a British spy plane even going across the top of Palestine to assist Israel in this war. So this is a US and British intervention to help Israel in a war against a non-state actor, and essentially the main method that Israel uses to fight this war is collective punishment of a civilian population. And Britain and the United States are now intervening on Israel's behalf and militarily involved in the war against the 2 million people of Gaza. And a lot of this is to avoid Israel committing itself to a land invasion of Gaza, which would be very difficult for the Israeli military, because frankly, these kids from Brooklyn, from Canada, from New York, from Britain, they do not have the steel to go hand to hand and street to street, as has been revealed. They are used, frankly speaking, to bullying unarmed children in Al-Quds, to sitting behind turnstiles and managing populations of Palestinians, to bullying people on the streets of Khalil. They are used to sitting in military bases and controlling drones. They're used to sitting in Unit 8200, where they listen to Palestinian calls and they use that information to blackmail them. That's what the Israeli military today is used to doing. It's comfortable with F-16s and F-35s. It is not comfortable in hand-to-hand combat on the street. And so that is what Israel is essentially trying to avoid. What you actually saw was Israel in a situation where the vulnerability of the Zionist idea was larger than ever, because essentially the Israeli military and intelligence establishment for the last year has been trying to overthrow Netanyahu. And essentially this process has served to force the military into the helm of controlling Israeli political power. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm not saying that the military and intelligence establishment were trying to overthrow Netanyahu lightly. I'm saying that because it has been documented fact that Mossad encouraged its employees to participate in demonstrations against Benjamin Netanyahu. The plethora of Israeli military and intelligence figures who came out and have called for Netanyahu to stand down is known. So my point is this, that in the lead up to October 7th, what you had was the Israeli military heavily committed in the West Bank to fighting the new groups that had popped up. But what you also had was the particular resistance faction, which is charged with carrying out the operation on October 7th, not participating in the last two wars against Gaza. So 2 wars across the last 2 years have been carried out against Gaza, and that particular organization did not participate with the other organizations. And so Israel had a complacency about this particular organization. And so, there's also been things published claiming that there are quite high-ranking people that are compromised within the Israeli military, and there was some level of information being passed to the resistance factions as well, and that led to the breakout of October 7th, and now we are where we are, where Israel is pummeling the civilian population, is cutting off electricity, fuel, and water from that population with the help of Britain and the United States and other NATO powers too. And what's happening within our countries is the crackdown on pro-Palestinian speech is getting even bigger. You've seen the FBI contacting a large amount of Palestinians in the United States today. It's been reported to talk to them about this. You've seen the Metropolitan Police in Britain calling up venues and asking that they close down shows like the Palestine Literature Festival, which even, as far as I understand, has had funding from the British Council in the past. Literally, a British government-funded literature festival has been shut down because the Metropolitan Police have called the venue. You've seen the Powell Music Fest to be held at a cathedral has been shut down because the Metropolitan Police called and said this will not be safe. So this is what we're seeing. These are the reverberations of October 7th, and it is, and as you know, the deletion of this video, 5.5 million views, that's a lot of work that went into that video, and it's a song that I've been able to go around the world and sing, and people know it. For it to be deleted from YouTube in this way, that is symptomatic of what is the wider censorship to come. And yeah, please go ahead, Alan. Be great to hear from you.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in because this is actually, it kind of feels like that old idea about disaster capitalism, this shock doctrine, that at any point, the powers that be will use big events to try to push forward whatever narrative they're looking for. And it's no coincidence that your song Lowkey has been kicked off of platforms right now. This isn't, it didn't happen a couple of months ago. It's happening now because they think they can get away with it. We're seeing in the United Kingdom, for example, the Conservative government, they're looking into making waving the Palestinian flag an offense. And this is even as they are instructing all government buildings up and down the land to fly the Israeli flags from the top of their turrets. France as well, what we're seeing there is quite similar. Today, France banned pro-Palestinian protests across the nation. We're not sure if that's going to be a permanent thing or not. It's not an idle threat either. We've seen water cannons used on pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Paris today. Foreign nationals are being told that they're going to be deported if they get caught participating in these. And yet, even still, we're seeing huge demonstrations across France in support of Palestine. I saw one images of it on your profile, actually, Lowkey, from Place de la République. Very large demonstrations in show of solidarity for Palestine, which is perhaps not surprising considering France's gigantic Muslim population, mostly from North Africa. Germany, which was already a bit of an S show when it came to free speech and when it came to Israel-Palestine, is really going in a very dangerous direction. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz told Parliament on Thursday that there were disgraceful images on our street of pro-Palestine protests. He's talked about having zero tolerance for anti-Semitism across Germany. And of course, while you don't want to see any instances of anti-Semitism, so often what they mean by that is solidarity with Palestine or opposition to Israel's expansionist policies or opposition to apartheid in general. And in fact, we're seeing that now whereby a lot of people in power are sharing images, for example, of graffiti saying "Free Palestine" on a wall or something, and saying that this constitutes anti-Semitism when it's not on the wall of a synagogue or anything. It's just on, like, a bridge or something, and that's supposed to be representative of anti-Semitism. So I think even though the war is going on in the Middle East, there are going to be casualties in Europe, and one of those casualties is going to be free speech, and it's happening in the United States as well, with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee reporting, as you said, Lowkey, that just dozens and dozens of people are calling into them, Palestinian nationals being detained by ICE, being visited by the FBI, mosques being raided. This is all going on in the West, supposedly in response to a relatively minor war happening across the other side of the world. But it feels like we're going to be losing a lot of our civil liberties, just as people over there will be as well.
To be honest with you guys, of course, Lowkey, I'm sure that you are deeply frustrated. I mean, I think that's a very simplified way of probably describing how you feel right now. But as a Palestinian who, when I first started MintPress, had that song playing during our protests for Palestine, the taking down of your song is a direct attack against Palestinians in the West and, of course, people in Gaza. But for us who have been ongoing for over a decade now, MintPress is over a decade old. For over a decade, we have dedicated our life, our careers, our reputations, everything. We've put everything on the line to call out the permanent war state, the ruthless politicians that are thirsty, bloodthirsty, and for pointing out the hypocrisy in them calling Palestinians living in Gaza in an open air prison as terrorists. And songs like yours that really empower people like myself and the many people that have organized protests and that have been speaking up for Palestine. It's been inspiring for us to hear that song as a reminder that, we are not terrorists. Of course, it is the people who are in charge who are terrorizing the rest of the world. I mean, this is a class war that we are living in, where we have a very wealthy and powerful elite that are using, their strong militaries to attack, to bomb, to exploit, to occupy, to terrorize people around the world. And just to see this song go down today, of course, is just one example. It's terrifying for free speech, and I'm sure that this is just an extension of the attacks that you have been facing as an independent artist by the Israel Lobby Group. And so I just want you to know that we at MintPress are going to continue to stand by you, of course, and do whatever we can to support you and to ensure that your voice is amplified, because it is so important for all of us to be supporting each other right now. When the powers that be are working together, they've got their hands locked in with each other, and they're working relentlessly to silence us. But the truth is that they are trying to silence us is because we are actually winning the information war. Why would they target a song pointing out that dropping bombs is terrorism? That's what you're pointing out.
and it's a song that is almost 14 years old. So for
why
it to
now?
to be taken off, absolutely. And like Alan said, it's the shock doctrine, and I massively appreciate your words. And I wanted to also ask you, as somebody that has family in Al Khalil and in Quds, and lived under Israeli occupation, what do you think our audience needs to know about what people are going through in those places now? And 35 have been killed in the West Bank during this period. So what can you tell us about what's happening there and how things are going?
Well, I think it's really, first of all, really important that people do reach out to their Palestinian friends and ask them how they're doing. Obviously, how I'm feeling is probably irrelevant to how Palestinians are feeling, but overseas who are living under the occupation every single day and being intimidated day in and day out by the apartheid system that is placed upon them, and by the Israeli military, by the politicians, by the settlers that are surrounding Palestinians. And Palestinians are not allowed to carry arms, they're not allowed to speak up for themselves. In fact, just yesterday, all Palestinian residents of Jerusalem, Al-Quds, received a message from, I believe, the city municipality saying that they are not allowed to post on social media anything about Palestine or remotely close to celebrating any resistance victories or anything in support of Palestinian liberation. And so Palestinians in Palestine, but mostly, of course, in Gaza, but my family is in Jerusalem, in Al-Quds, and also in Al Khalil, they're being suffocated and in terms of what they are allowed to do and say. And so I did speak to my family in Jerusalem. So they are going to work, but a lot of them are not going to school because there are rumors, and this is the same for people in Hebron, where there are several settlements surrounding the city of Hebron. Hebron is the largest Palestinian city and most populated Palestinian city in the West Bank. And in Tel Ermeda, there's a large settlement of 800 Israeli settlers. And there's the famous settlement of Kiryat Arba, which is where the famous genocidal Ben Gvir lives. And what he's doing right now is he's actually handing out over 10,000 rifles to Israeli settlers. And of course, it's being painted by local media that they're doing this as a form of security and self-defense. Of course, nobody's attacking these people, but what we've seen in the past is that this has empowered these settlers to form pogroms and come together and go around Palestinian cities and start attacking them violently, kidnapping children. I mean, Muhammad Abu Khdair is my neighbor in Palestine, in Al-Quds, in Shafat. His father went to school with my dad. That's how close the Palestinian people are with each other.
Can you tell us about his case? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so he was kidnapped. Okay, Muhammad Abu Khdair was kidnapped a couple of years. I think it was in 2000. I can't remember what year it was. Sorry, my mind is blank. Yeah, so he was kidnapped by Israeli settlers on the street that I used to live when I lived in Palestine. Okay, this is just how close to home this is. They kidnapped him, I believe it was after Maghrib and Isha Salah, after the evening prayers. And they forced him, and he's just 16 years old, and they forced him to drink gasoline, and they doused his entire body with gasoline, and they burnt him alive, and they left his body there I believe they put his body in front of his family's home. And that's how his family found him. And the consequences that these settlers face, like, they're not sent to prison for a lifetime for murder. They face these laughable court cases where they might serve a little bit of time, like a couple of months, or sometimes even they're let go. And so those are the kinds of things that Palestinians are facing right now. And my family in Al Khalil, when I spoke to them yesterday, they are not leaving their homes. The kids are not going to school. and they keep looking outside. They have also talked about how Israel has sent out mustarivin, which are basically Israelis, undercover Israelis that are dressed in Palestinian clothing. And they kind of try to get within the society to, collect information about who is where and what everybody is doing. And so that's what Palestinians are up against. And Israel is keeping track of every single Palestinian, who they are, who their family are, where they go to school. They have databases of these things. And yeah, of course, the Palestinian people are looking to stand up, but they are afraid of what is to come. I mean, Israel is using Gaza as an example, okay? They're showing Palestinians, like, you try to resist in any way, whether it's through marches, peaceful marches like we saw in the Great Return March, where literally over 50,000 Palestinians came out and protested and marched to the Gaza border, peacefully, unarmed, and Israel shot at medics, at children, at amputees, people that are in wheelchairs. They shot and they killed them. They shot, and that's what Israel's going to do. And no matter what Palestinians do, whether it's boycotting or marching peacefully or resisting through armed struggle, they will always be targeted in these attacks. And we in the West, as Palestinian Americans, Palestinian, people who are in the UK and other Western countries, or even just anti-war activists who expose the permanent war state, because that's all Israel really represents for the military-industrial complex, is just a proxy state for the military-industrial complex to continue to fuel profits for weapons manufacturers like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. So I don't know where I was going with that, but that's where we're at with all of this. And it's a shame that Palestinians do have to live through that every single day. And we are definitely privileged here in the United States and in the UK, where you guys are both based, as we don't have to face, these electricity cuts and water cuts and so forth. But I do want to play that clip by Nikki Haley. And I just want to preface by saying she's saying the quiet part out loud. Yes, she is a Republican, and yes, she's the front runner for the Republican Party. But she's kind of like, any other Republican. They will make the genocidal statements out loud, openly and clearly, okay? But the Democrats put that smile on their face like Obama did and appear to be more well put together and sophisticated in their speech. But they're doing just as much damage to the people in Gaza and around the world. Where is my thing? Here it is. And Alan or Lowkey, whoever wants to comment on this video, I think I've said enough. It would be great to talk about possibly the two-party system in supporting this. And also, it would be good to know how this reflects in the UK, because I know that you also have people within your governments like Keir Starmer and others who have openly supported Israel. So here you go.
This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America, because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu: finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. Iran's behind it. Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done. This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America.
Did one of you guys want to comment on this and maybe talk about some of the UK politicians that kind of echo this very racist, openly racist and genocidal kind of statement?
Yeah, sure. There's so many things we could talk about here. I mean, first of all, she's talking about finishing them, and yet she's not really very clear who they are. because of course Hamas gets lumped into the Palestinians all the time. So if somebody dies, Western media or Western officials will just claim that they are terrorists. We saw that, for instance, with the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, who was an anchor for Al Jazeera, who was shot in the head while covering Israeli aggression in Gaza, I believe it was, a while ago. She was smeared as a terrorist. So does Nikki Haley mean finish the journalists? Clearly, she's talking about Iran as well. There has been this push by a lot of the neocons in the United States to try to use this violence to try to further one of their long-term goals, which was war with Iran. And of course, war with Iran would probably make war with Iraq look like a cakewalk, considering the power of Iran's military, the size of Iran, its allies, etc. So this would plunge the world into risking a potential third world war, which would be quite obviously a threat to everybody on the entire planet. She talks about our enemies. I mean, she's very close to coming out and saying the Palestinian civilians are our enemies. So again, what she's saying here is the quiet part out loud here. Unfortunately, when we look at Europe, although perhaps we don't have quite as many politicians who will use this sort of genocidal rhetoric, the policies are pretty much the same. Europe generally goes along with the United States on these issues. There might be a couple of rare exceptions, for instance, in Ireland. But here in the United Kingdom, we've got Keir Starmer, who was asked at point blank recently whether he condemns or supports Israel cutting off the electricity and the water to Gaza. And he was pretty much supportive of it, which absolutely just goes to show where the Labour Party is right now. Keir Starmer is supposed to be a human rights lawyer, and yet the most obvious, blatant attack on human rights that's going on right now, he refuses to condemn, specifically because of who's doing it and who his allies are and who his enemies are. So just like Nikki Haley, he knows who his friends are and who his enemies are. And ultimately, I can't imagine that there's going to be too much pushback in the West to whatever Israel does, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is violence towards the Palestinians functions in Britain and the United States as very much a bipartisan orthodoxy, which is wrapped up in all forms of bureaucratic violence. So for Keir Starmer, it's not seen as beyond the pale, quote unquote, for Israel to cut off the electricity, the water and the food to Gaza. And even the idea that Israel's not occupying Gaza when it controls the water, the electricity and the food and the medical supplies. So for Keir Starmer, essentially, we have an established level at which polite society sees this hierarchy of humanity, which sort of buttresses the hierarchy of political subjectivity within our societies, that says, oh yeah, well, you know, Palestinians to be collectively punished is absolutely no qualms morally about that. And unfortunately, that's basically uniform across our political and media classes. And what has happened is exposing that in an even more stark way than ever before, because there wasn't a time when Israel was as vulnerable as it is today. And with the necessary phase in the dying of Zionism as an idea, this would be the consequence.
And I think basically the only responses that are showing real solidarity to the Palestinians outside of the greater Western Asia region come from Latin America. We've seen people like former President of Bolivia, Evo Morales, extend his unconditional support, or the government of Venezuela there. And so ultimately, you can really start to see where the fault lines in world politics are, where genuine anti-imperialist governments stand and where fake ones stand as well.
Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Did you guys have anything else to add before we wrap up the live stream?
I would just say that do not despair, people, while we are watching the spectacle of suffering in Gaza, essentially Israel is resorting to that because the idea and the unjust social arrangement, which is the spine of Zionism, is unsustainable. And you have so many different fault lines and vulnerabilities within the Zionist idea that by the day are becoming more and more visible to the naked eye. So do not despair. We will be victorious.
And I think it's important to remember, just to piggyback on what you just said, that when Nelson Mandela was fighting against the apartheid regime and the ANC, they were being referred to by the world and the international community as terrorists, and portrayed in a way that made them appear to be subhuman and savage. And today, Nelson Mandela is remembered as a revolutionary freedom fighter and even recognized by the United States as such, even though he was wanted by the CIA at one point. And so we have to remember that, we just have to keep fighting for the truth. We are in an information war, and we at MintPress are at that forefront of dispelling the myths within corporate media, deconstructing mainstream media lies, and building bridges at the same time to help people understand what people are living through in these countries that are living under the boot of the US military empire. And so thank you so much to everybody who has joined us today. It has been a difficult week, but we will continue to fight through our words and speak up for those who are oppressed around the world, who are suffering from the military-industrial complex. If you can, just a reminder, we are not shadow banned. Well, we are shadow banned, but what I was going to say is we have been demonetized from YouTube completely as a channel. The entire channel has been demonetized. So if you could continue to support us on Patreon and become a member, even for as little as $5 a month, we would greatly appreciate it. And yeah, that wraps up today's live stream as we break through the fog of war and soft propaganda. Please continue to support independent journalism and MintPress, and we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.